The night was cold and the streets of the alien town were empty, only the sound of the wind moving between broken walls. A human traveler named Daniel walked slowly, his boots making soft noises on the dusty ground. He was far from Earth, far from the life he once knew, but he had learned to survive on strange worlds. From the shadows, a soft cry reached his ears. Daniel stopped, his hand moving to the small blade on his belt. It was not the cry of an enemy, it was the voice of a child, trembling and weak. He followed the sound and soon found them. An alien woman, thin and pale, sitting by the wall of an abandoned building. 3 children huddled close to her, their small hands clutching at her torn clothes. The woman looked up, her eyes, large and glowing faintly in the dark, met his. She looked tired, as if life had already taken everything from her. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Human, please. Adopt my homeless children. End my loneliness." Daniel froze. His heart pounded at the strange request. He had expected fear, or maybe anger. Most aliens still hated humans, but here she was, begging him not for herself, but for her children. The children were quiet, their faces thin, their bodies weak from hunger. The youngest one hid behind his mother's arm, peeking at Daniel with wide eyes. The older boy tried to stand tall, but his knees shook. The girl held a small cloth doll, its face half torn, yet she hugged it as if it was the only treasure she had left. Daniel took a slow step closer. "Why me?" he asked in a low voice. He could not understand. Why would an alien widow trust a stranger, a human, when her own people had left her to suffer? Tears filled her eyes. She looked down at her children. "Because no one else will. They call us cursed. They say my children bring only misfortune. Since my husband died, doors have closed, food is denied. No one will take us in. No one will care. I beg you, human, take them. Give them a chance to live." Her words cut deep. Daniel felt something heavy press against his chest. He had seen war, he had seen cruelty, but this was different. This was not a battle, this was survival. The children shivered in the cold wind. The boy whispered something in his mother's ear. She nodded and pushed him gently forward. The boy looked up at Daniel and said, "Please, sir, we will not be trouble. We only need food, we only need a home." Daniel looked away for a moment, his hands tightened. If he took them in, his own life would change. The village would judge him, maybe even hate him. Already humans were seen as outsiders. If he accepted, he would carry their burden as his own. But when he looked back, he saw the widow's face. She was not just asking, she was pleading. Her loneliness was carved deep in her eyes. He saw her fear, her desperation, and her hope. The silence stretched. The wind howled through the broken buildings. Finally, Daniel took a step forward. He removed his cloak and placed it over the shoulders of the smallest child. The child's eyes widened in surprise. The widow gasped softly, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Daniel spoke quietly, his voice firm. "I don't know what the future will bring, but tonight, you will not be alone." The widow broke down in tears. Her children clung to her, warmth and relief flooding their tired faces. Daniel stood before them, uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. But in that moment, he knew one thing. He could not walk away, and somewhere deep inside, a bond had begun, fragile but powerful, one that would change all their lives forever. Morning light touched the broken streets, but it did not bring warmth. The alien widow sat near the fire Daniel had made. Her children gathered close, their small faces hidden under the cloak he had given. For the first time in many nights, they were not freezing. Daniel watched them quietly. His heart was heavy with questions. He had agreed to help them for the night, but what would happen after? Could he truly care for 3 children and their mother when he barely had enough for himself? The widow noticed his silence. Her voice was soft, but her words carried deep pain. "Do you know why they call us cursed, human?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. She looked at her children, brushing a hand through the girl's tangled hair. "Because no one wants to carry the weight of the forgotten. My husband was a soldier. He died in the war. His clan abandoned us. They said widows and orphans only bring sorrow. Since then we wander, unwanted, unseen." Her children listened with lowered heads. The little girl hugged her doll tighter. The boy stared at the ground, his lips trembling, but saying nothing. Only the smallest one looked at Daniel with innocent eyes, too young to understand the cruelty of the world. Daniel clenched his fists. He remembered Earth's wars. He remembered how widows and children were often left with nothing. He thought humanity had been cruel, but here, it seemed no different. He stood and pulled out a small piece of bread from his pack. He handed it to the children. Their eyes widened. They had not seen food in days. The boy carefully broke it into 3 pieces, giving one to his sister and one to the smallest. He kept the smallest piece for himself. Daniel saw this and felt a sharp ache in his chest. The widow lowered her head. See how they live, human. Even in hunger they share, but the world refuses to share with them. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "They are forgotten children, but they should not be forgotten forever." Daniel said nothing, but inside his mind was a storm. If he left them, they would die slowly, cold, hungry, alone. But if he kept them, his life would change forever. He would no longer be a traveler. He would no longer be free. The children finished their bread quickly, then looked at him with quiet gratitude. The girl spoke softly. "Thank you, sir." Her voice was so small it almost broke. She held her doll against her chest and whispered, "You are the first who has given us food without asking for anything." Daniel froze. He understood her words. If others had given them food, it had been with cruelty, with demands. His chest grew tight. The widow reached for his hand. Her fingers were thin and cold. "Please, human, you may think you are only helping for one night, but to us, you are a light we thought we lost. Even a small kindness feels like a miracle." Daniel looked away, his jaw tense. He had not come here to save anyone. He had come to survive, but now these children had pulled him into their lives. As the fire crackled, footsteps sounded in the distance. Daniel's instincts sharpened. He rose quickly, ready for danger. The widow pulled her children close in fear. Shadows moved along the walls. Voices whispered. "They are still here," one voice muttered, harsh and cold. Another answered, "The cursed widow and her brats. Even a human walks with them now. He will regret it." Daniel's grip tightened on his blade. He looked at the widow, at the frightened children pressed against her. He felt his choice growing heavier with every breath. The forgotten children were no longer just hers. They were now tied to him. Whether he wanted it or not, their fate and his had begun to walk the same path, and already the world was watching, waiting to judge him for it. Daniel sat outside the small camp, staring at the sky. The stars were distant and cold, yet they reminded him of something bigger. He had always been a wanderer, moving from town to town, surviving on what he could find, no attachments, no promises, no burdens. But now, the widow and her 3 children weighed heavily on his mind. Their quiet faces haunted him. He had not expected this. He had not expected their lives to reach into his heart. Inside the small tent, the widow whispered to her children, trying to soothe their fears. The boy shivered, worried about the footsteps they had heard last night. The girl clutched her doll, repeating soft prayers under her breath. The smallest one, too young to understand fear, simply held onto his mother's cloak, staring at the fire. Daniel knew danger had not disappeared. He had seen the same clan that abandoned them lurking around the outskirts. Their faces hard, eyes cruel. They had called the widow cursed. But Daniel knew curses were not magic. They were the world's refusal to care. He faced a decision. His heart pulled one way, his survival another. If he left now, the widow and her children would be easy targets, abandoned to the cold streets or worse. If he stayed, he risked drawing the clan's attention. Even his own life could be in danger. He clenched his fists, thinking. The weight of choice pressed on him. He was not a hero, just a man who had tried to survive. Yet, he could not walk away. Not now, not after seeing their faces. The widow approached him silently, her voice trembling but steady. "Human, you do not have to save us. But if you stay, you will be our protector, even just for a little while." She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of refusal. Daniel shook his head, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can. I barely have enough for myself. If they find us, it will not end well, Tha. Is not my fight." The widow's gaze softened. "We do not ask for your life, only for your heart. We do not ask for safety, only for hope. Human, sometimes hope is stronger than the strongest blade." Her words struck him harder than any enemy. He thought of his lonely nights, of roads with no one waiting at the end, of fires that did not warm a soul. He realized something he had avoided for years. He was tired of being alone. Daniel rose slowly, looking at the children sleeping quietly in the tent. Their trust was pure, unearned, yet given freely. He could not let it go, not this time, not ever. He pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, feeling the weight of his choice. He would stay, but he would need a plan. The clan could return any moment. He had to protect them without failing. The widow stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, a silent thank you in her touch. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He had made a decision, and there was no turning back. The night deepened, wind whistling through broken buildings. Shadows moved beyond the firelight, but Daniel's resolve did not falter. He would face whatever came. For the widow and her children, for the first time, survival was no longer just about him. It was about them. And in that, he found a strange strength. But even as he planned, he knew the world would not wait. Every step would bring danger. Every choice could cost them dearly. The human had chosen. But now the true test was about to begin. And Daniel realized, protecting the forgotten children was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Daniel sat outside the small camp, staring at the sky. The stars were distant and cold, yet they reminded him of something bigger. He had always been a wanderer, moving from town to town, surviving on what he could find, no attachments, no promises, no burdens. But now, the widow and her 3 children weighed heavily on his mind. Their quiet faces haunted him. He had not expected this. He had not expected their lives to reach into his heart. Inside the small tent, the widow whispered to her children, trying to soothe their fears. The boys shivered, worried about the footsteps they had heard last night. The girl clutched her doll, repeating soft prayers under her breath. The smallest one, too young to understand fear, simply held onto his mother's cloak, staring at the fire. Daniel knew danger had not disappeared. He had seen the same clan that abandoned them lurking around the outskirts. Their faces hard, eyes cruel. They had called the widow cursed. But Daniel knew curses were not magic. They were the world's refusal to care. He faced a decision. His heart pulled one way, his survival another. If he left now, the widow and her children would be easy targets, abandoned to the cold streets or worse. If he stayed, he risked drawing the clan's attention. Even his own life could be in danger. He clenched his fists, thinking. The weight of choice pressed on him. He was not a hero, just a man who had tried to survive. Yet, he could not walk away. Not now, not after seeing their faces. The widow approached him silently, her voice trembling but steady. "Human, you do not have to save us. But if you stay, you will be our protector, even just for a little while." She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of refusal. Daniel shook his head, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can. I barely have enough for myself. If they find us, it will not end well, Tha. Is not my fight." The widow's gaze softened. "We do not ask for your life, only for your heart. We do not ask for safety, only for hope. Human, sometimes hope is stronger than the strongest blade." Her words struck him harder than any enemy. He thought of his lonely nights, of roads with no one waiting at the end, of fires that did not warm a soul. He realized something he had avoided for years. He was tired of being alone. Daniel rose slowly, looking at the children sleeping quietly in the tent. Their trust was pure, unearned, yet given freely. He could not let it go, not this time, not ever. He pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, feeling the weight of his choice. He would stay, but he would need a plan. The clan could return any moment. He had to protect them without failing. The widow stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, a silent thank you in her touch. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He had made a decision, and there was no turning back. The night deepened, wind whistling through broken buildings. Shadows moved beyond the firelight, but Daniel's resolve did not falter. He would face whatever came. For the widow and her children, for the first time, survival was no longer just about him. It was about them. And in that, he found a strange strength. But even as he planned, he knew the world would not wait. Every step would bring danger. Every choice could cost them dearly. The human had chosen. But now the true test was about to begin. And Daniel realized, protecting the forgotten children was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Morning brought no peace. The town was awake now, but the air felt heavier, colder, not from weather, but from whispers, Daniel had left the widow and children hidden in the old warehouse. He went into the market to find food, keeping his hood low and steps careful, but he felt eyes on him, not just one or two, many. As he passed the fruit stall, the vendor stared. The woman next to him whispered something, shaking her head. Another man muttered, "There goes the human, living with the cursed widow." Daniel ignored them, bought a few pieces of bread, and turned to leave. But a large alien stepped into his path. His skin was dark green, his eyes narrow and sharp. "You feed the widow's brats now, human," the alien spat. "Don't say we didn't warn you." Daniel said nothing. He moved around him and walked away, but the words stayed in his mind. When he returned to the warehouse, the widow saw his face. "They've started talking, haven't they?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "They know." She closed her eyes, her shoulders sinking. It won't stop with words. That night, Daniel kept watch again. The children were asleep, but the widow sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. "I used to believe," she whispered, "that someone would help us, that my people would change. But instead, they watched as we starved. They feared us, hated us, just for surviving." Daniel looked at her. "Why do they hate you so much?" "Because I didn't die when my husband did," she replied. "Because my children remind them of a man they lost in war. They blame us for their pain instead of facing their own." Daniel understood. Hatred was easier than healing. The next morning, the warehouse door had a sign burned into it, a symbol of exile, of warning. Someone had come in the night and left it there. The widow stared at the mark, her lips trembling. "They will come soon, and they won't just whisper." Daniel stepped forward and tore the sign down, throwing it into the fire. "Let them come, Michoan," he said. "They'll see I'm not afraid." But inside, he was, not for himself, for them. Later, a boy from the town, not more than 12, came running near the warehouse. He didn't speak, just tossed a rock through the broken window and yelled, "Get out, human lover!" The widow flinched. The children clung to her. The youngest began to cry. Daniel stormed out, but the boy had already vanished. He returned inside and found the girl trying to calm her baby brother. She looked up at Daniel and asked in a small voice, "Are they going to hurt us?" Daniel knelt beside her. "No, not while I'm here." The girl nodded slowly, trying to be brave. She didn't cry, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes. That night, as the fire crackled and the outside world filled with whispers and hate, Daniel made a quiet promise to himself. He would not just protect them. He would show this town, this world, that kindness was stronger than fear, that family was not made by blood, but by love. Even if the whole planet turned against him, he would not walk away. The whispers had started, but they didn't know Daniel yet. Not really. The wind howled through the broken town as darkness fell again. The warehouse creaked, the old walls shaking like bones. Inside, the widow sat with her children close, her arms wrapped around them like a fragile shield. Daniel sat at the entrance, blade in hand, ears sharp. He had barely slept the night before, and his eyes were tired, but he didn't let them close. Something was coming. He could feel it. Earlier that day, he had seen a group of aliens watching him from across the street. They didn't speak, but their eyes were full of something worse than anger. Disgust. "They're planning something," he had told the widow. She didn't ask what, because she already knew. Now the fire inside the warehouse was low, casting only a soft orange glow. The children had fallen asleep, but not peacefully. The girl had cried until her voice gave out, and the boy kept jerking awake at every sound. The widow hadn't spoken in hours. Her eyes were open, watching the dark, her hands never leaving her children. Then, just past midnight, Daniel heard it. A soft crunch outside, boots on gravel, followed by a whisper. Then another sound, metal scraping. Daniel stood slowly and moved toward the door, blade ready. He peeked through a crack in the wall. 3 figures were there, faces covered, holding sticks and sharp tools. They crept toward the warehouse like hunters. Daniel's heart raced, but his grip was steady. He turned back to the widow. "Wake the children quietly," he whispered. She did as told, gently shaking them. Her voice was calm, even as fear filled the room. Daniel moved behind the door, silent, waiting. The first attacker reached for the handle, began to pull it open. Daniel struck, knocking the door open with force. The figure stumbled back, shocked. "Run!" Daniel shouted to the widow. "Take the children to the back." The attackers didn't expect resistance. One swung a stick toward Daniel's head, but he blocked it. kicked the attacker in the chest. Another came at him with a metal rod. Daniel slashed at his arm, forcing him to drop it with a cry. The third tried to slip inside, but the widow stood in his path, her eyes fierce. She held a rusted metal pipe, hands shaking but firm. "You will not take my children," she screamed. The attacker paused, surprised by her courage. Daniel took the chance and tackled him to the floor, knocking him out cold. The others fled into the night, dragging their wounded with them. Daniel stood breathing hard, blood running down his cheek from a shallow cut. The widow knelt beside him, tears in her eyes, but she wasn't crying from fear this time. She was crying from the shock that someone had fought for her. The children clung to her, shaking but safe. Daniel sat down, exhausted. "They'll come again," he muttered. "Maybe stronger, maybe angrier." The widow nodded. "Then we'll be ready." He looked at her, surprised. She smiled weakly. "You're not alone anymore, human, and neither are we." Outside, the wind howled louder, but inside the warehouse something stronger had taken root. A family was forming, not by blood, but by battle, and Daniel knew. He wasn't just protecting them now, he was one of them. The morning after the attack was quiet, too quiet. The town looked normal, but Daniel could feel the change in the air. People no longer whispered, they stared, openly as he passed. He had gone into town for medicine. His cut from the night before had become red and swollen. The widow had begged him not to go, but they had no choice. The children needed food, and he needed bandages. As Daniel stepped into the shop, the alien clerk narrowed his eyes. "We don't serve traitors," he said coldly. Daniel placed a small bag of coins on the counter. "I'm not here to make trouble, just need supplies." The clerk pushed the coins back. "You chose her over your own safety. Now live with it." Daniel stared at the man, then picked up the bag and left without a word. Back at the warehouse, the widow cleaned Daniel's wound with cloth and boiled water. Her hands were gentle, her touch careful. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Because of us, you are being pushed out." Daniel winced from the pain, but shook his head. "No, because of you. I've remembered what it means to care. You didn't curse my life. You gave it meaning." The widow looked at him in silence. Her eyes were full of emotion, but she said nothing. Later that day, the children played quietly in the back of the warehouse. The little girl was showing her doll to the youngest, laughing softly. The boy sat beside Daniel, watching him fix a broken knife handle. "Can I help?" the boy asked. Daniel looked at him, surprised. "You sure?" The boy nodded. "You're strong, but not scary. I want to learn how to protect people too." Daniel smiled slightly and handed him the tool, guiding his hands. It was the first time the boy had spoken without fear. That night, the widow sat beside Daniel again, under the stars shining through the broken roof. "You've done so much for us," she said. "But I must ask, will you stay? Not just tonight, but longer." Daniel didn't answer right away. He stared at the stars, thinking, "I've never had a home," he said. "Never stayed in one place long enough to be needed. But now, I think I want to." The widow reached out, touching his hand gently. "We trust you, human. My children look at you like you've always been here. They believe in you, and so do I." Daniel felt her hand in his, warm and soft. He looked at her, and for the first time in years he smiled, not out of politeness but truth. But trust was not given lightly. And the next day tested it. The town leaders came to the warehouse, led by the same alien who had insulted Daniel in the market. "You are breaking our peace," the leader said coldly. "You brought this cursed family here, and now violence follows you." Daniel stood in front of the widow and her children, firm and calm. "I didn't bring violence," he replied. "I brought protection. Maybe you should ask why your people attack children before blaming those who defend them." The leader scowled. "Leave by nightfall, or we will come with force." As they left, the widow stood beside Daniel, not hiding this time, not afraid. "If we leave, we lose everything again," she whispered. Daniel looked down at her, then at the children, who stood beside them silently. "Then we don't run," he said. "Not this time." The town gave them until nightfall to leave, but Daniel didn't pack, neither did the widow. She fed her children quietly, her hands steady, but her eyes were watching the door. The children didn't cry or ask questions anymore. They had learned to be silent when fear came close, but something had changed in the warehouse. Something deep. Daniel sat with the boy, showing him how to tie knots and sharpen sticks. "You don't fight with anger," he said gently. "You fight to protect." The boy listened carefully, nodding without a word. His small hands copied Daniel's movements, and he smiled, just a little. In the corner, the little girl braided string into her doll's hair. She had found an old piece of ribbon and tied it into a bow. Her mother smiled faintly when she saw it. It had been a long time since any of them smiled. As the sun began to set, the widow brought out a small piece of cloth, carefully folded. Inside it were dried fruits, something she had hidden for a special moment. She offered them to Daniel and said, "This was all I saved before I lost everything. I want to share it now." Daniel hesitated, then took one. "Thank you," he said, "but you didn't have to." "I did," she said. "You gave us shelter, safety, and something more." Daniel tilted his head. "What's that?" "Dignity," she replied softly. "You didn't look at us like we were broken. You treated us like people. That's more than anyone has in a long time." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're not broken. You're stronger than most people I've ever met." The children sat around them, listening, even though they pretended not to. The youngest crawled into Daniel's lap and leaned against him without fear. Daniel looked down in surprise, then slowly wrapped his arm around the child to keep him warm. "You've got a strong little heart," he said, the boy giggling quietly in reply. "That nastiness." They didn't run. They stayed awake, sitting close to one another, waiting for the town's threat to return, but the attackers didn't come. Instead, one of the older women from the market arrived quietly, a small basket in her hands. She placed it near the door without a word. Inside were dried herbs and flatbread. Daniel stepped out, confused. "Why are you helping?" The woman didn't meet his eyes. "Not all of us agree with the council. That widow once helped deliver my granddaughter. She saved her life. They forgot that. I didn't." Then she walked away into the dark. The widow stood beside Daniel, stunned. Her lips trembled. She remembered. Daniel nodded. "It's a start." And that was how the bond grew. Not with loud words, but with small acts. Not through blood, but through shared pain and healing. The children laughed a little more that night. The widow leaned closer to Daniel when they sat, and he didn't pull away. When the fire burned low, the boy whispered, "You're like my father now." Daniel looked at him surprised. His chest felt tight. He couldn't find the words to answer, so he just smiled and gently pulled the blanket over the boy's shoulders. By the third morning, the whole town knew the widow and her children were still inside the warehouse and that the human had not left. People gathered outside in silence, not with weapons, but with judgment. They stood like statues, faces cold, watching the building like it was something dirty, something dangerous. Daniel saw them through the cracks in the wall. He didn't speak, just stood quietly, back straight, blade sheathed. Inside, the widow held her children close, her body stiff. "They came," she whispered, not surprised, not shaken, just tired. The little girl peeked through a hole in the wood and whispered, "Why are they just standing there?" Daniel answered gently, "They're waiting for us to give up." The widow stepped forward, her voice calm but heavy. "They want to show. They want us to beg, to kneel, to disappear." Daniel looked at her. "And will you?" She met his eyes. "Not anymore." A loud knock echoed on the warehouse wall. The town council stood outside, 5 figures dressed in robes, trying to look noble, but their eyes were sharp and cold. The eldest, a tall alien with silver horns, raised his voice. "You've been warned, human. You shelter outcasts, defy law, break peace." Daniel stepped outside alone, facing them. "I broke nothing," he said calmly, "but I will break anyone who tries to harm them again." Gasps came from the crowd, whispers stirred, but the council leader didn't flinch. "They are cursed. They bring pain wherever they go. Do you truly claim them?" Daniel didn't look away. "Yes." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Then by ancient law, they are yours, and their shame becomes yours." Daniel nodded. "I accept it." At those words, the crowd grew restless. Some looked angry, but others, quietly, began to murmur something else, something uncertain. The widow stepped out behind Daniel, her children clinging to her legs. She didn't cry and didn't hide. Her eyes were full of fire. She stood beside the human, proud and unshaken. "You judge me," she said, voice clear. "But I raised these children alone while you turned away. I asked for help. You gave silence. I asked for food. You gave stones. And now that a human shows kindness, you call it a threat." The crowd was silent. She looked around, her voice trembling but strong. "If kindness is shameful, then I will wear it proudly." From the back of the crowd, a soft voice spoke. "She helped my sister when she was sick," said an older alien woman, "and no one else would touch her." Another voice followed. "Her husband died in your war, but you left her with nothing." One by one, people began to speak, not loudly, but enough to be heard. The judgment was starting to shift. The council leader saw it, his jaw tight. "This is chaos," he growled. Daniel stepped closer. "No," he said, "this is truth." He looked at the crowd and said, "I came here a stranger, but this family gave me a reason to stay. I didn't adopt them out of pity. I chose them, because they chose to survive with dignity, even when the world turned its back." Silence hung in the air. Then a child from the crowd walked forward and offered the little girl a flower. The crowd gasped, but no one stopped him. The girl took it, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you." The council turned away, defeated not by violence, but by truth. And Daniel stood tall, not as a visitor anymore, but as a father. The crowd slowly faded after the confrontation. Some left in silence, others whispered with lowered eyes, but a few, just a few, nodded before they walked away. Daniel stood in the doorway of the warehouse, watching the sun rise over the broken roofs. The light hit his face, soft and warm, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a stranger. Behind him, the widow wrapped her children in a worn blanket. Her hands were tired, but her heart felt different now, lighter. The little girl placed her flower near the fire, carefully setting it where they all could see. "Someone gave it to me," she said proudly, "not because they had to, but because they wanted to." The boy smiled, just a little. "No one has ever done that before." Daniel turned, leaned down and said, "You see, people can change." The youngest reached up, arms open. Daniel picked him up without hesitation. The boy giggled, pressing his small face against Daniel's shoulder. The widow watched them, her eyes filling with something she hadn't felt in years, peace. Later that day, a soft knock came at the door. It was the older woman who had left the basket of food. She carried a small bundle of cloth. "Blankets," she said softly, "and medicine. It's not much, but I remember what she did for my family." The widow smiled. "Thank you." The woman looked at Daniel, then at the children. "You make a strange family," she said, "but maybe that's what makes it strong." More visits came over the next few days. Quiet gifts left at the door. A little food, a bottle of water, some old clothes. No one said much, but the silence was no longer hateful. It was thoughtful, careful. Daniel helped repair the warehouse roof with old scrap. The boy followed him, handing him tools and watching every move. "When I grow up," the boy said, "I want to be like you." Daniel paused, his chest tightening again. "Yi-dao." "We'll be better," he replied, smiling. At night, they still lit a small fire, but not because they were hiding anymore. Now it was warmth, a symbol of who they had become. One fire, one family. The widow sat beside Daniel as the children played quietly. Her voice was low but steady. "When my husband died, I thought my story had ended. But you helped me write a new chapter." Daniel looked at her. "You didn't need me to save you. You were always strong. I just stood beside you long enough for others to see it." The widow laughed softly, the sound full of life. "Then stay beside me a little longer." Daniel nodded. "As long as you'll have me." That night, the children curled up beside them, their eyes closed peacefully, not in fear, but in comfort. And for the first time, they didn't feel like orphans. They felt like a family. Daniel didn't know what the future held. Maybe more struggles, maybe more storms. But he knew one thing. He would face it all, with them, because the widow had given him something he didn't even know he needed, a reason to stay. And the children had given him something greater, a place to belong, a new family, born not from blood, but from love, loyalty, and the simple, quiet bravery of standing together when no one else would. And in that forgotten corner of the galaxy, a human heart found its home.